What if I told you that the modern obsession with finding healing might be the very thing keeping your soul perpetually sick? Take a moment and really look around us. We are living in the most therapeutically saturated culture in human history. We have millions of podcasts dedicated to mental health. We have endless shelves of self help books, trauma informed life coaches, luxury wellness retreats, and daily meditation apps downloaded on the very glowing devices that are actively driving us insane. We have never had a larger, more sophisticated vocabulary to describe our human pain. We talk casually about our triggers, our toxic work environments, our narcissistic abusers, our boundary issues, and our wounded inner child. We wear our clinical diagnoses, like name tags, at a corporate networking event. We introduce ourselves to the world by leading with our wounds, and yet, despite all of this unprecedented focus on wellness, look at the data. Look at the streets of our cities. Look in the mirror. We have never been more anxious. We have never been more profoundly isolated. We have never been more medicated, agitated, and spiritually bankrupt. The rates of clinical depression, systemic anxiety, and sheer existential despair among adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s are not just climbing gradually, they are skyrocketing. We are running on an endless, exhausting treadmill of self-optimization, desperately trying to fix ourselves. We have begun to treat our souls like broken computer hard drives that just need the right software update, the perfect morning routine, or the ultimate green juice to finally function correctly. We are exhausted. You are exhausted. Society has cleverly and quietly turned healing into an aesthetic. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar global industry that relies entirely on one terrifying business model. It requires you to remain a patient forever. The modern wellness complex sells you the seductive idea that healing is a final destination you can reach if you just buy enough lavender bath bombs, cut off enough friends who supposedly do not serve your energy, and retreat further and further into the sterile, heavily guarded, lonely fortress of yourself. We are constantly and aggressively told to protect our peace at all costs. But what we actually end up protecting is our isolation. We are building massive, invisible shrines to our own brokenness, worshiping daily at the altar of our past traumas. And in this incredibly dense, suffocating echo chamber of self-care, the human soul is starving to death. Now, let me pause right here and be absolutely, unequivocally clear. I am not talking about real, evidence-based clinical psychology, methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, or exposure therapy. Those are vital, life-saving disciplines. That is hard, grueling, deeply uncomfortable work that forces you to face your irrational fears, build actual resilience, and take personal responsibility for your cognitive distortions. God absolutely uses trained therapists, and true clinical work is a profound, necessary tool for human flourishing. There is no glory in refusing medical or psychological help when you are in a crisis. What I am actively dismantling today is the pop culture, algorithm-driven, highly commercialized version of healing. The version that tells you your feelings are the ultimate, unquestionable truth of the universe. The version that encourages you to view every single human conflict through the lens of victim and oppressor. Here is the terrifying truth that mainstream pop psychology will never tell you, and frankly, a lot of modern, feel-good, culturally relevant churches are simply too afraid to preach from their pulpits. What if the divine peace you are begging God for requires the complete and total destruction of the identity you have so carefully built around your pain? To understand how God actually heals the human soul, we have to look far past the sanitized, comfortable, heavily marketed version of modern spirituality. Today, we treat the creator of the universe like a cosmic pharmacist. We walk into the sanctuary, present our carefully curated list of emotional symptoms, and demand a spiritual pill. We want a quick, supernatural surge of peace. We want an instant numbing of the grief. We want a divine eraser to wipe away the memories of the people who hurt us. We want the pain gone immediately, but we absolutely do not want to change the way we live, the way we think, or the way we treat others. When God refuses to prescribe the anesthetic on our preferred timeline, we walk away offended, feeling abandoned, and loudly claiming that faith simply does not work for us. But divine healing is never an anesthetic. It is an excavation. And excavations are inherently violent. They disrupt the ground. They tear up the comfortable topsoil. They expose the dark, hidden roots that we have spent years burying under the dirt of our coping mechanisms. There is a profoundly unsettling story recorded in the ancient texts, specifically found in the Gospel of John, chapter 5. It paints a vivid picture that completely shatters our modern, delicate, therapeutic sensibilities. Jesus walks into a place called the Pool of Bethesda. This was a massive gathering place in Jerusalem for the blind, the sick, the lame, and the paralyzed. I want you to really imagine the sensory reality of this scene. It is not a sterile, modern hospital room with crisp white sheets, fluorescent lights, and quiet, attentive nurses. It is an ancient, crowded waiting room exposed to the blistering Middle Eastern sun. It is filled with the heavy smell of unwashed bodies, the sounds of moaning, the palpable weight of despair, and hundreds of desperate people waiting for a miraculous stirring of the water. Jesus walks right through the middle of this suffering crowd. He bypasses the people who have been sick for a week, a month, or a year. He intentionally approaches a specific man who has been paralyzed for 38 years. I need you to stop whatever you are doing and think about the crushing weight of that timeline. 38 years. Over 3 decades of waking up every single morning and lying on a dirty, rough mat. 3 decades of begging for copper coins from strangers who try not to make eye contact with him. This man's condition has completely swallowed his identity. His paralysis is no longer just a medical tragedy. It has become his absolute reality, his only source of income, his established social status, his entire community, and his sole definition of self. If you were to ask anyone walking through the markets of Jerusalem who this man was, they would not use his given name. They would simply say, "Oh, that is the paralyzed beggar by the pool." Jesus stops and looks down at this man. Now, according to our modern standards of radical empathy, Jesus should immediately validate the man's profound trauma. He should sit quietly beside him, hold his weathered hand, and tell him how deeply unfair the Roman occupation is, or how broken the religious healthcare system of Judea has become. He should tell him that his anger is valid, and that he has every right to stay exactly where he is. But Jesus does not offer a warm, comfortable platitude. He does not spend an hour validating the 38 years of accumulated trauma. Instead, he looks the man in the eyes and asks a question that, on the surface, borders on wildly offensive. He asks, "Do you want to get well?" Why on earth would you ask a paralyzed man lying in the dirt by a legendary healing pool if he wants to get well? It seems like a cruel joke. Of course he does. Why else would he be lying there in the heat? Or does he? In clinical psychology, there is a widely recognized and deeply studied phenomenon known as secondary gain. It is the hidden, dark, often subconscious benefit that we receive from staying broken, sick, or traumatized. When you are suffering from a chronic issue, whether physical or emotional, society expects less of you. You are automatically excused from the heavy, terrifying lifting of responsible adult life. Your ongoing failures have a built in, socially acceptable alibi if your business venture fails, if your marriage collapses into resentment, if your relationships with your children are toxic. You can simply point a trembling finger at your childhood trauma, your anxiety disorder, or the person who broke your heart 10 years ago. You receive constant sympathy. People lower the bar for you. If you are permanently cast in the role of the helpless victim, you are never, ever required to take the terrifying step of being responsible for your own future. When Jesus looked down at the paralyzed man, he was not mocking him. He was piercing straight through the physical affliction, directly into the dark, twisted architecture of the human soul. He was essentially asking this man a terrifying question. Are you actually willing to lose all the social privileges of your brokenness? Because if I reach down and heal your legs right now, everything changes. You can no longer lie by this pool and collect coins from sympathetic strangers. You will have to stand up, walk into the city, and find a job. You will have to take full responsibility for your own life. You will have to step out of this safe bubble of predictable misery and walk into the terrifying, unpredictable arena of human expectation. You will no longer have an excuse for why you are not contributing. Do you actually want that dangerous, heavy burden of freedom? Or have you secretly fallen deeply in love with the familiar weight of your chains? God's healing does not look anything like mainstream self-care. Mainstream self-care whispers a highly marketable, comforting lie into your ear. It says, you are perfect exactly as you are. You have no flaws that need correcting. The only problem in your life is everyone else around you. Just strictly remove the negative influences, set infinitely rigid boundaries, block everyone who challenges you, and focus entirely on your own internal happiness. God's healing tells a much harder, infinitely more loving truth. It says, you are profoundly, deeply broken. Your heart is inherently deceptive. The false, protective self that you have constructed to survive your past must be put to death so that the true self, the one created in the image of God, can be resurrected. This is the hidden, unpopular angle that goes against absolutely everything the social media algorithms feed you today. The modern digital landscape pushes a hyper-individualistic gospel of self-worship. It teaches that you are the absolute moral center of the universe. It tells you to publicly cancel anyone who causes you even a fleeting moment of psychological discomfort. The tragic, devastating result of this cultural philosophy is visible everywhere we look. We have successfully raised an entire generation of fragile, deeply defensive people who mistake chronic emotional isolation for healthy boundaries. We confuse narcissism with self-love. We have weaponized clinical therapy speak to avoid any real moral accountability for our bad behavior. We use heavy words like gaslighting, narcissistic, and toxic to immediately silence anyone who dares to lovingly challenge our blind spots. We have built walls so high that nobody can hurt us, but we are slowly freezing to death inside the fortress. But God does not heal the human soul by turning its gaze inward. God heals the soul by violently pulling it outward. True psychological and spiritual healing always, without exception, involves a radical decentering of the self. Even secular philosophers have understood this fundamental truth for centuries. The ancient Stoics knew that true peace comes from accepting harsh reality, focusing on what you can control, and taking extreme responsibility for your own mind. But as a follower of Christ, I believe the ultimate Complete restoration happens when we finally stop staring obsessively at our own bleeding wounds and start looking upward to the Creator and outward to our neighbors. Think about the mechanical nature of human suffering. Severe trauma traps you in the past, forcing your brain to replay your worst, most humiliating moments on an endless, exhausting loop. Chronic anxiety traps you in the future, forcing your nervous system to agonize over catastrophic events that have not even happened yet and likely never will. But notice what both of these conditions do. They do the exact same thing. They trap you entirely inside the claustrophobic confines of your own head. The human soul was never intelligently designed to be self-obsessed. It breaks under the weight of its own reflection. It was designed for deep communion. It was built to connect intimately with the God who formed it and to pour itself out in sacrificial service to other human beings. This is exactly why when God actually begins to answer your prayers and heal your soul, it almost always feels like your life is getting significantly worse before it gets better. The comforting, protective illusions you have lived with for decades are brutally stripped away. The clever coping mechanisms you used to survive your chaotic childhood or your devastating divorce. The relentless workaholism, the dark, cynical sense of humor, the icy emotional detachment, the heavy drinking on weekends, the endless, numbing scrolling through short-form videos in the dark. God starts dismantling all of them, piece by agonizing piece. And suddenly, without your heavy armor, you feel completely raw. You feel incredibly exposed to the elements. You feel a kind of pain you have never felt before. You literally feel like you are dying. And this is exactly the point in the journey where millions of people quit the process. They mistake the sharp, productive pain of the surgeon's scalpel for the dull, destructive pain of the disease. They feel the intense, burning discomfort of true spiritual growth, and they panic. They immediately turn around and run as fast as they can back to the familiar, predictable comfort of their dysfunction. Because the brutal, undeniable truth of human nature is that familiar hells are almost always preferable to unfamiliar heavens. We would much rather stay miserably sick in a dark world that we understand than be beautifully healthy in a bright world that requires immense courage. But what happens if you refuse to run? What happens if you force yourself to stay on the operating table? What if you let the divine surgeon finish the agonizing work he started? If you stay, you will eventually discover the ultimate, mind-bending paradox of the Christian narrative. The paradox that shatters all of our modern expectations of what healing is supposed to look like. The paradox is this: the scars do not disappear. In our modern, sanitized pursuit of healing, we demand a magical eraser. We want a healing that wipes away the past entirely, making our minds and bodies exactly as they were before the trauma occurred. We want it to be as if the brutal abuse, the shocking betrayal, the crippling addiction, or the massive financial failure never happened at all. We want smooth, untouched, unblemished skin. But look closely at the focal point of the Christian faith. Look at the ultimate model of restoration, the resurrected Christ. When Jesus returns from the grave, having successfully conquered the ultimate enemies of sin, death, and hell itself, he does not return with flawless, glowing, untouched skin. He returns in a glorified body, yet he intentionally bears the horrific, jagged scars of his violent crucifixion. He walks into a locked room with his terrified disciples, holds out his pierced hands, reveals the deep wound in his side, and says, "Look at me, touch the scars, see that it is really me." Why in the world would the omnipotent Son of God choose to keep the hideous marks of his greatest trauma for all of human eternity? Why not erase them? Because God does not waste human pain. He redeems it. Your true healing is never going to be found in the total erasure of your painful story. Your healing is found in the complete integration of it. The very deep wounds that the enemy used to try and destroy your life, the very trauma that kept you paralyzed on a dirty mat by the pool for years, become the exact spiritual credentials God uses to grant you the moral authority to help others. A person who has never truly suffered cannot authentically comfort the broken. A person who has never tasted the bitter ashes of failure cannot guide someone out of the darkness. The healed soul does not magically forget the dark, terrifying valley of the shadow of death. Rather, the healed soul becomes a fearless, experienced guide for those who are currently wandering, lost in it. Your deepest, most humiliating pain, once fully surrendered to God, becomes your most powerful weapon against the darkness. But let me relieve you of a massive, exhausting burden right now. Redeeming your scars does not necessarily mean you have to start a global, non-profit organization. It does not mean you have to write a best-selling, tell-all memoir about your trauma. It does not mean you have to turn your darkest moments into a highly polished public ministry on social media. In our modern culture, we put far too much toxic pressure on ourselves to be the spectacular heroes of our own suffering. We feel like if we do not monetize our pain or turn it into a public spectacle, we haven't truly healed. Listen to me. Sometimes the greatest, most profound miracle is simply living a quiet, normal life. Sometimes your entire ministry is just doing the hard, invisible work of breaking a toxic generational curse so that your children do not have to carry the heavy bags you had to carry. Sometimes true healing simply means that you finally get to wake up in the morning, drink a cup of coffee, go to a normal job, deeply love your family, and sit quietly in a room by yourself without being violently controlled by the ghosts of your past. You are not triggered by every shadow. You are not running from your own memories. And that ordinary, quiet, deeply boring freedom, that is a massive generational victory. Heaven rejoices over that quiet freedom just as much as a stadium full of people. We are living in a fast-paced, highly medicated society that is absolutely terrified of human suffering. We are frantically trying to biohack, medicate, meditate, and manifest our way out of the fundamental realities of the human condition. But a strong, immovable soul is forged only in the intense heat of the crucible. God is not remotely interested in making you a perfectly well-adjusted, highly comfortable, perpetually entertained consumer in a rapidly decaying global culture. He is not trying to optimize your morning routine for maximum corporate productivity. He is trying to make you a dangerously free, radically loving, spiritually resilient force of nature. He is trying to turn you into the kind of person who can walk boldly through the fires of hell and drag other people out with you. So, as we bring this to a close, I leave you with the very same deeply unsettling question that has been echoing across 2,000 years of human history. It is a question that effortlessly cuts through the loud, distracting noise of every self-help guru, every trendy wellness podcast, and every sophisticated algorithm designed to keep you numb and paralyzed. You have been lying by the pool for a very long time. You know the exact dimensions of your mat. You know the familiar, well-rehearsed, perfectly memorized script of your pain. You know exactly who to blame for why you are still lying on the ground. You have the diagnosis. You have the vocabulary. You have the sympathy of the crowd. Do you actually want to get well? Because I promise you, if you finally say yes to that question, absolutely everything in your life is going to change. The comfortable excuses end today. The safe, predictable victimhood dies today. The secondary gain is gone. And the absolute hardest part of the entire process is this. Once the divine surgeon heals your legs, he is not going to carry you. You have to bend down, pick up that heavy, dirty mat yourself, and walk out into the unknown. Are you ready to walk?